You're not missing them. You're missing yourself. You checked your phone again, not because someone called, not because you were expecting a message. You checked it because some part of you, a quiet, persistent part, was hoping for something you already know isn't coming. And the worst part isn't the silence on the screen. The worst part is that you already knew the screen would be silent, and you checked anyway. That is where this conversation begins. Not with philosophy, not with advice. With that moment, the one you recognize, the one you have lived more times than you want to count. There is something happening inside you that does not quite have a name yet. You might call it missing someone. You might call it longing. You might call it heartbreak or grief or just a dull, persistent ache that follows you into the morning and waits for you at night. But whatever you have been calling it, there is a chance, a real chance, that the name is wrong. Because what if the pain you are carrying right now is not actually about them? The Stoic philosophers did not build their philosophy around comfort. Marcus Aurelius did not sit down in the middle of leading an empire and write the meditations so that people would feel better. He wrote so that people would see more clearly, and clarity, real clarity, almost always arrives with a kind of discomfort attached to it. So before we go any further, let this land for a moment. You are not missing them. You are missing something else, something older, something closer, something that was yours long before they ever entered your life. And the reason this hurts as much as it does is not because they were so irreplaceable. It is because what you lost was not them, it was yourself. That is what this video is about, not about them, not about what went wrong or who said what. This is about the version of you that existed inside that relationship, that particular way of being seen and feeling alive, about what happened to that version of you when it ended, and about what it actually takes to come back to yourself, not to who you were before, but to something deeper, something more conscious, something you may have been avoiding for longer than you realize. The truth we are starting with is this: the ache you feel is real. The pain is real. But its source is not where you have been looking. Stay with that, because by the end of this, the question you have been carrying, how do I stop missing them, will no longer feel like the right question. You don't miss them, and that's what hurts. Think about what you actually replay in your mind. It is rarely the arguments. It is rarely the moments where things fell apart. What you replay, what pulls you back again and again in the middle of ordinary moments, is how you felt. The lightness, the ease, the sense of being known or wanted or simply not alone in the way that used to feel so unbearable. You are not replaying them. You are replaying a feeling. And that distinction matters more than almost anything else we will talk about today. Because here is what no one tells you about grief after a relationship ends. The sharpest pain is not the absence of the other person. It is the absence of the version of yourself that only existed when they were there. That version of you, the one who laughed differently, who felt more open, who had somewhere to direct their attention and care, that version does not have anywhere to live anymore. You think you want them back. But if you sit with it honestly, really honestly, in the quiet where you do not have to perform your grief for anyone, what you actually want is to feel the way you felt. You want access to that inner state again, the warmth, the sense of mattering, the feeling of being fully present in your own life because someone else was present in it with you. Epictetus wrote that the only things truly in our power are our opinions, our impulses, our desires, and our aversions. Everything external, every person, every circumstance, every relationship falls outside that domain, not because those things are unimportant, but because they were never the source of what we felt. They were the condition, and conditions change. What remains is what was always inside you. What happened is not that they took something from you. What happened is that your access to certain parts of yourself became organized around their presence. The warmth was real, the openness was real, but over time, Without you fully noticing, the switch that turned those things on became connected to them, to their voice, to their presence. And now the switch feels broken, not because it is, but because you forgot that you were the electricity all along. The emotional loop you can't exit. There is a pattern that happens inside the mind after loss, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It starts with a memory, something small usually, a smell, a sound, a particular quality of light at a certain time of day. The memory arrives without permission, and with it comes the feeling, the warmth or the ache or both at the same time, the way only emotional memory can carry two contradictory things simultaneously. Then comes the idealization. The mind begins to smooth out the difficult parts quietly and automatically, the way water finds the path of least resistance. It does not do this to deceive you. It does this because the painful parts of a memory are harder to hold, and the brain prefers coherence over accuracy. So what you remember becomes slightly better than what actually was. The person becomes slightly more than who they actually were. Then comes the suffering. Not because you decided to suffer, but because the idealized version of what you lost now stands in sharp contrast to what you have. And what you have, the ordinary, unromantic reality of your daily life, cannot compete with a memory that has been quietly edited in your favor. And then it starts again. Memory, feeling, idealization, suffering. This is the loop. And the reason you cannot exit it by simply deciding to stop is that this loop is not a choice. It is a pattern, a neural pattern, worn into the architecture of your experience through repetition. Marcus Aurelius understood this with remarkable precision. In the Meditations, he wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Not occasionally, always. Every time the mind returns to the same image, the same feeling, the same version of events, it deepens the groove. It makes the path back to that place easier to travel and harder to avoid. The loop is made of familiarity. The brain returns to those memories not because they were the best moments of your life, but because they are known. And the mind, under the disorientation that follows loss, reaches for what it knows, even when what it knows also hurts. You are not stuck because you cannot let go. You are stuck because the loop has become more familiar than the silence on the other side of it. And familiarity for the nervous system feels a great deal like safety, even when it is not. The question is not how to stop the loop by force. The question is what you are actually reaching for every time it begins. Because it is not them. It never was only them. It was the feeling of knowing where you stood inside your own life. When absence feels like meaning, here is something the mind does that almost no one talks about. When something is present, consistently, reliably, woven into the texture of your ordinary days, the mind adjusts to it. It becomes background. It becomes assumed. You stop noticing it the way you stop noticing the sound of rain after the first few minutes. Presence over time becomes invisible, but absence is loud. Absence creates contrast, and contrast is what the brain uses to assign value. The sudden removal of something is what causes the mind to calculate, often for the first time, what that thing was worth. And because that calculation happens in the middle of pain, it is almost always inflated. So what happens after a relationship ends is this. The mind takes everything it did not fully process while the relationship was happening. All the warmth it took for granted, all the moments it failed to mark as significant, and presents them now, in the absence, as evidence of an enormous loss. The pain of that presentation feels like proof. It feels like confirmation that what you lost was irreplaceable, but that is not proof. That is contrast. The mind doing what it always does when something familiar disappears, amplifying. making the echo louder than the original sound ever was. When you stand in an empty room and speak, your voice sounds different than in a room full of people and furniture. The empty room does not make your voice stronger. It simply removes everything that was absorbing it before. The sound was always there. The silence just makes it seem larger. That is what absence does to meaning. It does not create it. It reveals what was already there, through a lens that magnifies, that distorts, that turns a real thing into something that feels mythological. Marcus Aurelius wrote that if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your own estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. The version of them that lives in your mind right now in this absence, is it an accurate portrait? Or is it an echo, amplified by an empty room, sounding larger than it ever actually was? You didn't lose them, you lost your anchor. There is a specific kind of disorientation that follows the end of a significant relationship, and it is different from sadness. Sadness has a texture you can recognize. It arrives, it moves through you, it eventually shifts. But this other thing, this particular vertigo that comes after someone who organized your world is no longer in it, that just sits there, underneath everything, like the ground itself became slightly unreliable. You wake up and for a fraction of a second, before full consciousness arrives, everything is normal, and then it lands, not the grief exactly, the awareness that the structure of your day, the rhythm of your attention, the quiet architecture of your inner life, all of it was built around something that is no longer there. This is about orientation, about the way human beings use relationships as reference points. As anchors, we organize ourselves in part through our connection to others. We know who we are, in part, by how we are reflected in someone else's perception of us. When that anchor is removed, what you feel is not only the loss of the person, you feel the loss of your own location, and that is a much stranger experience than most people have words for. You find yourself not knowing what to do with a Tuesday evening, not because you have nothing to do, but because the emotional meaning of a Tuesday evening was quietly organized around a presence that no longer exists. You find yourself uncertain about decisions that should feel simple: where to eat, what to watch, how to spend a Saturday, because those decisions were made inside a context that has dissolved. Underneath all of that is a question you may not have fully let yourself hear yet. Not, what do I do without them, but something closer to this. Who am I without this? Epictetus described the difference between things that belong to us by nature and things we come to treat as ours through habit and attachment. The inner life, the capacity for reason, for reflection, for self-direction that belongs to us by nature. But the emotional geography we build around external things, around people and roles, that is constructed. And constructed things, when their foundations shift, require rebuilding. You did not lose your identity when they left, but you lost the external structure that was holding a particular version of it in place. The question is not how to find a new anchor. The question is whether you are ready to stop needing one. The silent trade you didn't notice. It did not happen in a single moment. There was no conscious choice, no morning where you woke up and said, "I will begin giving myself away today." It happened slowly, incrementally, in small adjustments that each felt reasonable at the time. You softened an opinion because it seemed easier. You let something go that mattered to you because the conflict felt too costly. You reorganized your time and energy around the rhythms and needs of another person, not because you were forced to, but because connection required adaptation, and adaptation felt like love. And maybe it was love. Partially. But it was also something else. It was a trade. And you did not fully see the terms. The closer we grow to another person, the more we tend to unconsciously calibrate ourselves to them. what makes them comfortable, what keeps the peace, what maintains the warmth of the connection. These things begin to shape us in ways we rarely examine. We move toward what works. We move away from what creates friction. And over time, the version of yourself that exists inside the relationship becomes meaningfully different from the version that existed before it began. There is a difference between being changed through genuine encounter and being slowly edited out of your own life in the name of maintaining connection. And the difficult thing is that these two processes can look identical from the inside. You do not feel yourself being edited. You feel yourself adapting. Choices accumulate. And what accumulates over months or years of small adjustments is a version of yourself shaped by the need to belong, to be accepted, to maintain the emotional safety the relationship provided. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a man should not value anything that will require him to lose his self-respect. Those quiet agreements we make with ourselves about who we are, they are the architecture of self-respect. And they erode usually not through grand betrayals, but through small unremarked silences. What you are sitting with now, underneath the grief, is the accumulated weight of everything you quietly set aside, everything you stopped saying, everything you stopped pursuing, every version of yourself you let go quiet because the relationship did not have room for it. The question is whether you are willing to look clearly at what was exchanged, because until you do, you cannot know what needs to be reclaimed. This was never about love alone. Love is real. That needs to be said clearly before anything else. What you felt was real. The connection was real. The moments of genuine intimacy, of being seen, of feeling that another person's presence made the world more navigable. Those deserve to be honored as such. But love is rarely the only thing operating inside a significant emotional attachment. And the failure to recognize what else is present alongside the love underneath it is one of the primary reasons that loss becomes so difficult to move through with any clarity. Carl Jung described a mechanism he called projection, the process by which we take aspects of ourselves that we have not fully integrated and place them onto other people. We see in them qualities that actually belong to us, capacities for strength, for tenderness, for freedom, for wholeness, and experience those qualities as if they originate in the other person. This is not a pathology. It is how the deeper parts of the self announce their presence, not directly, but through the mirror of another person, through the sense that in their presence you become more fully alive. When the relationship ends and you find yourself somehow diminished, it is worth asking what you are seeing in them that actually belonged to you. What capacity, what version of yourself did they reflect back that you have not yet learned to access directly? Because that is what you are grieving, underneath the love. You are grieving a version of yourself you could only see in their reflection, and the loss of the mirror is not the same as the loss of what the mirror was showing you. Woven through the love was also validation, the ongoing reassurance that you were worthy of being chosen. And that reassurance, when it arrives consistently over time, stops feeling like reassurance and starts feeling like a stable fact about yourself, one that the relationship was quietly underwriting every day it continued. When the relationship ends, the validation ends with it. And what you call missing them is in part the loss of that daily confirmation of your own worth. Epictetus wrote that men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. The opinion, in this case, is the belief that what you felt in that relationship, the sense of worth, of aliveness, of being fully yourself, could only exist in the presence of that particular person. That belief is what the grief is protecting, and that belief is what needs to change. Not the love. The love can stay. But the belief that the love was the only source of what you felt, that is what is keeping you from finding your way back to yourself. The version of you that only existed there. There is a version of you that no longer has anywhere to live. Not the whole of you, but a specific version, a particular configuration of who you were, how you moved through the world, what you noticed, what made you laugh, how you understood yourself, that only existed inside the particular atmosphere of that relationship. We talk about missing the other person, but we rarely talk about the version of ourselves that we miss, the one that felt lighter, or more open, or more capable of joy in a particular unguarded way, the one that had somewhere to direct its tenderness, the one that knew without thinking what kind of person it was, because the relationship was providing a continuous, living answer to that question. Think about it honestly. Were you more patient there than you are in other areas of your life? More adventurous, more willing to be vulnerable, to let yourself be known without the usual defenses? Whatever the specific qualities were, they were real. They were you. But they were a version of you that required that particular relational context to fully emerge. Jung's work on individuation holds that the parts of ourselves we have not yet integrated tend to emerge through relationship. The shy person who becomes eloquent with the right listener. The guarded person who becomes tender with the right partner. These are not masks. They are genuine aspects of the self, but aspects that have not yet learned to exist independently, that still require the external condition in order to show up. And when that external condition disappears, those aspects of the self go quiet. Not permanently, but in a way that feels from the inside like losing a part of yourself you did not know you could lose. Marcus Aurelius wrote that it is not events that disturb people, but their judgments about events. And the judgment operating here underneath the grief is this, that the version of yourself you accessed in that relationship was the best version, the most alive, and that without the conditions that produced it, you are somehow less. That judgment is understandable. It is also incomplete. The version of you that you are missing, you were the one who created it. They were the occasion, but you were the source. And if you created it once in those conditions, then the question worth sitting with is not whether it is gone, it is whether you are willing to create it again. This time on purpose. This time without needing someone else's presence to justify it. Why letting go feels like losing yourself. When someone tells you to let go, notice what happens in your body. There is probably resistance, a kind of tightening, a quiet but definite refusal that does not feel like stubbornness. It feels like self-preservation, like releasing your grip on this grief, on this person, on this story, would not free you but diminish you. That response is not irrational. It is a sign that the mind has correctly identified something real. Letting go of this does not only mean letting go of them, it means letting go of a version of yourself, of a story about who you are, of a particular way of understanding your own life that had this relationship at its center. When the assumption of the relationship is broken, what collapses is not just the connection. What collapses is a certain narrative coherence. The sense that your life is a story moving in a direction that makes sense, and without that narrative coherence, the instruction to let go sounds less like liberation and more like an invitation to fall into something formless. This is why letting go feels to so many people like a form of self-betrayal, like agreeing to become less defined, less real, less located in your own experience. Epictetus addressed this fear in the structure of his entire philosophy. The Stoic practice of distinguishing between what is within our control and what is not at its core an intellectual exercise. It is an interior restructuring. The slow, difficult work of relocating your sense of self from the external, from the relationships and roles that give ordinary life its shape, to the internal, to the part of you that does not require those structures to remain intact in order to remain intact itself. He wrote in the Discourses that freedom is not something that comes from outside. It is achieved by the one who has learned not to desire anything that depends on another, not because love is a mistake, but because a self that can only exist under specific external conditions is a self that is never fully secure, never fully its own. The letting go that actually works is not the letting go of a person. It is the letting go of the belief that you require that person or any person in order to be fully yourself. And it does not happen because someone told you to. It happens when the interior weight of carrying what is no longer yours becomes heavier than the fear of what exists on the other side of it. The other side is not emptiness. It is something you have been avoiding for longer than this relationship lasted. The Stoic shift. You were never in them. There is a moment in Stoic philosophy that most people walk past without stopping. A moment that sounds simple, almost too simple, until you hold it against your actual experience, and then it becomes one of the more disorienting ideas you will ever sit with. The moment is this: you were never in them. Not your happiness, not your sense of aliveness, not the warmth and openness you felt when you were with them. None of it was in them. All of it was in you. And the relationship was the condition under which you allowed yourself access to what was always only entirely yours. The point is not that what you shared was an illusion. The point is about source, about the difference between a condition and a cause. Epictetus wrote that sickness is an impediment to the body, but not to the will, unless the will chooses. He was making a distinction that runs through the entire structure of Stoic thought, between the external event and the internal response, between the condition and the experience of the condition. The relationship was a condition, a real, meaningful one, a condition under which something opened inside you that had perhaps been closed before. But it was a condition, not a cause. The warmth came through them, not from them. Through the particular opening that the relationship created in your interior life. But the capacity for warmth, the depth of it, was always yours. When you feel that dull, persistent absence, when the day feels flatter and ordinary things seem inert, you are not experiencing the removal of something external. You are experiencing the closing of an interior access point. The switch is still there, the electricity is still there, but the mechanism that used to turn it on is gone. And without it, you do not know how to reach what is still yours. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the things you think about determine the quality of your mind, not the things that happen to you, not the people around you, the direction and quality of your own attention. What you have been doing in the grief is directing your attention outward, and the mind, following attention with characteristic loyalty, has been interpreting that outward direction as evidence that what you need is also out there, that the source of what you are missing is located somewhere beyond yourself. But it is not. It never was. This does not make the grief smaller. What it does is change the direction of the work. The work is not recovery. It is not about returning to who you were before, or finding someone new who can recreate the same conditions. The work is something harder and more interesting than either of those things. It is learning how to be the condition yourself, reclaiming what was always yours. You have arrived at a place in this conversation that most people never quite reach, through the recognition that the loss is real, and that its source is not where you thought it was, and that the work ahead is not about recovering what was taken, but about reclaiming what was always yours and was never actually gone. Reclaiming yourself is not the same as returning to who you were before the relationship began. You are not going back. What you are reclaiming is not a past self. It is a deeper self, a self that was present before the relationship and during it, and that remains present now, not despite what happened, but partly because of it. Marcus Aurelius described what he called the retreat into oneself, the practice of turning inward, not as withdrawal from the world, but as a return to one's own foundation. He wrote that a man has always the power of retiring into himself, not as escape, as orientation, as the act of locating beneath all the noise of external life, the interior ground that does not shift when circumstances do. That interior ground is what you are returning to now, and returning to it requires a series of small, deliberate choices, made consistently over time, to direct your attention inward rather than outward. There are three interior movements that are nearly universal to genuine reclamation. The first is honesty about what was given away, not in a spirit of self-recrimination but of inventory. What did you stop doing during the relationship that mattered to you? What opinions did you soften? What pursuits did you let go quiet? You cannot reclaim what you have not accurately identified as missing. The second is the willingness to tolerate the discomfort of being unwitnessed. One of the subtler losses after a relationship ends is the loss of someone who knew the texture of your days. The discomfort of being unwitnessed, of living days that no one specific is tracking, is one of the most persistent and least acknowledged aspects of this grief. Tolerating that discomfort, without immediately moving to fill it, is part of what allows the interior life to begin operating on its own terms. The third is the practice of generating, deliberately and from the inside, the states that the relationship used to facilitate. The warmth, the openness, the sense of being fully present in your own experience. Not by force and not pretending they are available on demand, but by creating the conditions through the quality of attention you bring to ordinary moments under which they naturally arise. This is learning to be the access point to your own aliveness rather than waiting for an external condition to provide it. The version of yourself you are missing is not gone. The warmth, the openness, the aliveness, those did not leave with the person. They went quiet, they went inward. They are waiting for you to stop looking for them in the place they used to appear and begin looking for them in the place they actually live. The identity you avoided meeting. Here is the truth that sits underneath everything else we have talked about today. The grief was never only about them. Underneath all of it, quieter and more persistent than any of the surface pain, there has been something else operating. Something that was present long before this relationship began, and that the relationship, in all its warmth and genuine meaning, was partly serving to keep at a distance. That something is the encounter with yourself, not the self you present to others, not the self that functions, that manages, that moves through ordinary life with sufficient competence, but the deeper self, the one that exists beneath the roles, beneath the relationships, beneath the accumulated identity constructed over years of being in relation to others, the self that has no audience, the self that simply is, without context, without reflection, without the ongoing external confirmation that you are who you believe yourself to be. That self is uncomfortable to meet, not because it is damaged, but because it is unmediated. Because encountering it directly, without the buffer of a relationship or a role or a story about who you are, requires sitting with a quality of silence that most people spend significant portions of their lives engineering ways to avoid. And relationships, particularly the intense identity-organizing kind that produce this quality of grief when they end, are among the most effective avoidance mechanisms available to the human psyche. Not because they are false, but because they are real enough and absorbing enough to make the interior silence temporarily unnecessary. While the relationship exists, the question of who you are without it does not press. The relationship is answering it continuously through being someone's partner, someone who is known and wanted and accounted for in another human being's experience of the world. When that answer is removed, the question returns, with the full force of everything accumulated during the period when it was being deferred. Jung described this as one of the central dynamics of the shadow, the aspects of the self that remain unexamined, unexplored, unlived. Not only the dark aspects of the personality, everything that has not yet been brought into conscious awareness, everything you are that you have not yet had the courage or the occasion or the sufficient stillness to look at directly. The end of a significant relationship is one of the most powerful occasions the psyche creates for this kind of looking. Not because loss is secretly a gift, that reduction does not honor the real difficulty of what you are going through, but because the structures that were making the looking unnecessary have been removed, and in their absence, what remains is exactly what was always there, waiting, beneath everything. You, just you. Most people, when they arrive at this moment, experience it as emptiness, as a flatness that feels like purposelessness. They reach for distraction. They throw themselves into work or into the search for a new relationship, not because they are weak, but because the interior silence, when it first makes itself fully felt, sounds a great deal like nothing. But that is not what it is. What the silence actually contains, when you stay with it long enough, is the raw material of a self that has not yet been fully built, not because something went wrong, but because the building was always going to require this discomfort, this unmediated encounter with what exists when nothing external is providing the answer. You have spent a long time being known through another person's eyes. Now comes the harder and more important work, learning to know yourself through your own. You were never missing them. You have stayed with this long enough now to hear what comes at the end, not a resolution that ties everything into something comfortable, not a formula for moving on, or a promise that the ache will simply stop. What comes at the end of this is something quieter and something more permanent. It is a reorientation, a shift in the direction you have been looking. Not dramatic, not sudden, but a gradual, honest, sustainable turning from the outside where you have been searching for what you lost, toward the inside where it has been waiting with more patience than you have perhaps been able to extend to yourself. You were never missing them. The love was real, the relationship was real, the specific, irreplaceable texture of what existed between you, that was real, and it deserves to be honored as real. But what you have been experiencing in the absence, the ache, the reaching, the sense of being somehow less than yourself, that was never about them. That was always about the parts of yourself that their presence made available, that their absence closed off, and that the grief has been pointing you toward with every sleepless night and every moment of quiet that felt heavier than it should. What you were missing was connection, not to them, but to yourself. The kind that does not require another person to be present in order to exist. The space that Marcus Aurelius kept returning to across the entire length of the meditations, the place he called the retreat into oneself, and described as the quietest and most untroubled retreat available to a man in this life. What you were missing was identity. Not the identity that the relationship provided, but the one that exists beneath it. The inner citadel that Epictetus pointed toward, the part of the self that no external event can reach without permission, that no loss can permanently diminish, that no ending can take away, because it was never given to anyone in the first place. What you were missing was presence, that not their presence in your life, but your own, the quality of being fully here, fully alive to the texture of ordinary experience, without requiring a particular set of external conditions to justify that aliveness. You do not need to be finished with the grief to begin this return. It only requires the small, consistent, honest choice to look inward rather than outward when the reaching begins, to ask not what is missing from your life, but what is being asked of you by the life you are actually living. Because the silence is saying something. It has been saying it all along, underneath every sleepless night and every checked phone and every moment of grief that felt larger than you had words for. It has been saying, come back. Not to who you were before, not to the version of yourself that existed inside that relationship, not backward at all, but inward, deeper, toward the part of yourself that you have been circling without fully entering for longer than this grief has lasted. The question you arrived here with, how do I stop missing them, was never quite the right question. Not because it was wrong, but because it was looking in the wrong direction. The question that replaces it does not look outward. It looks inward. And it does not ask about them at all. It asks, who do you become when you finally stop looking for yourself in someone else? That question has an answer. It will not arrive in a single moment of clarity. It will arrive slowly, through the honest daily practice of returning to yourself, through the small choices that accumulate into a new kind of interior ground, through the gradual discovery that what you were reaching for, the aliveness, the warmth, the sense of being fully present in your own experience, was never taken from you. It was always here. You were always here. And this, right here, in the quiet on the other side of everything you have been carrying, this is where you begin.